History is often told like a storybook: heroes, villains, discoveries, and epic victories. But what if I told you that much of what you think you know is a lie? For centuries, leaders, storytellers, and even teachers have passed down facts that were twisted, exaggerated, or completely fabricated. And today, we're exposing 25 of the biggest lies ever told in history. Some were clever propaganda, some were harmless myths, and some changed the entire course of the world. Stick with me till the end, because the final lies on this list will completely change the way you look at human history. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more mind-blowing breakdowns like this one. 1. The Trojan horse was real. We've all seen the movies or read the epic poems. The Greeks build a massive wooden horse, roll it into the gates of Troy, and hide soldiers inside. At night, the Greeks jump out, slaughter everyone, and win the war. A perfect story, right? The problem is, most historians don't believe it happened. In fact, the Trojan horse likely wasn't a horse at all. Some scholars think horse may have been a metaphor for a war machine or a siege tower. Others believe it could have been a poetic way to describe an earthquake that broke Troy's walls. What's clear is this: the wooden horse we imagine today is more fiction than fact, but the lie stuck for over 2,000 years. 2. Napoleon was short. Ask anyone about Napoleon Bonaparte and they'll say he was brilliant, but short. The truth? He wasn't unusually short at all. He stood around 5'7", average for a European man of his time. The myth started because of a measurement mix-up. The French inch was longer than the English inch, so when his height was translated, it sounded shorter than it was. Add in British propaganda mocking him as the little corporal, and the world ran with the joke. Ironically, Napoleon had taller guards around him, which made him look smaller in portraits, but in reality, he was perfectly average. 3. Vikings wore horned helmets. Picture a Viking in your head. Chances are, you're imagining a burly warrior with a horned helmet. But that's pure fantasy. Real Viking helmets were simple iron caps designed for protection, not decoration. The horned image came much later, specifically from 19th century opera costume designers who wanted the Vikings to look more dramatic on stage. Archaeologists have never found a single authentic horned Viking helmet. Yet thanks to Halloween costumes, comic books, and cartoons, the lie became more famous than the truth. 4. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." The doomed French queen is often portrayed as arrogant, dismissive, and heartless. The most famous example is the quote, "If they have no bread, let them eat cake," but there's zero evidence she ever said it. Historians believe the line was actually written years before by philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it wasn't even about her. Revolutionary leaders later pinned the phrase on Marie Antoinette to inflame anger against her. It worked so well that the line stuck for centuries, forever shaping her image as the queen who didn't care about starving peasants. 5. George Washington had wooden teeth. One of America's favorite founding father myths is that George Washington wore wooden dentures. While it's true he suffered from terrible dental problems and lost most of his teeth, his false teeth were never made of wood. Instead, they were crafted from ivory, animal bone, and even human teeth. The wooden myth likely came from the way his dentures stained over time, giving them a dark, grainy look. It's less flattering than the wooden version, but definitely more historically accurate. 6. Humans only use 10% of their brain. You've heard it in movies, motivational speeches, and self-help books. Humans only use 10% of their brain. Sounds inspiring, right? Imagine what we could do with the other 90%. The truth? It's a total myth. Brain imaging shows that almost every part of the brain is active at different times, even while resting or sleeping. The idea came from a misinterpretation of early 20th century psychology research, and Hollywood picked it up because it sounded mysterious. But neuroscientists today agree we already use 100% of our brains, just not all at the same exact moment. 7. Christopher Columbus discovered America. In school, we're taught Columbus discovered America in 1492. But the reality is far more complex. Millions of indigenous people were already living there, with thriving cultures and civilizations. On top of that, Norse explorer Leif Erikson reached North America nearly 500 years earlier, around the year 1000. Columbus wasn't the first, he was just the one who connected the Americas to Europe in a lasting way. But his voyages also unleashed disease, conquest, and colonization. The discovery story is less about truth and more about who got to write history books. 8. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. One of the most repeated fun facts is that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space. But astronauts who've been up there say otherwise. The wall is long, yes, but it's also relatively narrow and blends in with the natural landscape. What's actually easy to see from orbit are cities, highways, and airports, things with high contrast. The Great Wall myth stuck because it sounded impressive, but in reality, even with the best view, you'd need help spotting it. 9. Salem witches were burned alive. The Salem witch trials are infamous in American history, but here's the twist. None of the accused witches in Salem were burned. Instead, most were hanged, and one man was pressed to death with heavy stones. The burning at the stake image actually comes from European witch hunts, where that method was used. Over time, people merged the stories, making it seem like fiery executions happened in Salem too. It's a chilling lie that Hollywood keep repeating. 10. Einstein failed math. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientific minds ever, is often described as a child who failed math in school. The truth? He excelled in math and was solving complex equations by his early teens. The myth likely comes from a mistranslation of his school records or confusion with the Swiss grading system. Einstein himself once laughed at the claim, saying, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." The idea stuck though, because it makes people feel like even geniuses struggled once. 11. The Earth is flat. We often hear that people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat until Columbus proved otherwise. But that's not true. As far back as ancient Greece, mathematicians had already calculated Earth's roundness using shadows and measurements. By the Middle Ages, most educated Europeans knew the Earth was a sphere. The flat Earth myth became popular much later as a way to exaggerate the ignorance of the past. Ironically, the belief in a flat Earth has been revived today, not by medieval peasants, but by modern conspiracy theorists. 12. The Emancipation Proclamation freed all slaves instantly. Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation is often celebrated as the moment all enslaved people were freed in the United States. But that's not accurate. The proclamation only applied to Confederate states that were in rebellion, places where Lincoln had no real authority at the time. Slavery continued in Union states until the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. The proclamation was important, but the idea that it magically freed everyone overnight is one of history's oversimplified lies. 13. The Roman vomitorium was a place to vomit. The word vomitorium sounds like a disgusting Roman room where people purged during feasts. But it wasn't that at all. A vomitorium was simply a large passageway in amphitheaters or stadiums designed to let crowds spew out quickly. The vomiting association was a 19th century misunderstanding, and it's been repeated ever since. So no, Romans didn't throw up between courses in fancy dining halls, it's just a nasty myth. 14. Bloodletting was a medical cure. For centuries, doctors believed that almost any illness, from headaches to fevers, could be cured by draining blood. This practice, called bloodletting, was based on the ancient idea of balancing the body's humors. In reality, it often made patients weaker and sometimes killed them. Even George Washington, America's first president, died after being drained of nearly 40% of his blood by well-meaning doctors. The belief lasted for over 2,000 years, proving just how powerful medical lies can be. 15. Caesar's last words were, "Et tu, Brute?" Shakespeare immortalized Julius Caesar's assassination with the line, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" It's powerful, tragic, and poetic. But history doesn't back it up. Ancient Roman writers recorded different versions of Caesar's final words, and some claimed he said nothing at all as he was stabbed 23 times. Shakespeare's invention was so dramatic that it became more famous than reality. Once again, literature shaped history more than facts. 16. The Dark Ages were totally dark. The term Dark Ages makes us think of 1,000 years of ignorance, poverty, and no progress after Rome fell. But the period wasn't as bleak as the myth suggests. While Europe did struggle with instability, many scientific and cultural advancements occurred, especially in the Islamic world, where scholars preserved and expanded on Greek and Roman knowledge. Even in Europe, technologies like windmills, eyeglasses, and universities emerged. Calling it dark oversimplifies a complex and fascinating time. 17. The first Thanksgiving was a peaceful feast. School textbooks paint a picture of pilgrims and Native Americans sitting together in harmony over a turkey dinner. While there was indeed a harvest celebration in 1621, the reality of colonization was far darker. Disease, land theft, and violent conflict followed soon after. For Native Americans, Thanksgiving became less about peace and more about survival. The Happy Feast story was later promoted to create a national holiday of unity, but it leaves out the tragic consequences. 18. Old maps were always accurate. We take maps for granted today, but for centuries, maps were filled with lies. Some were honest mistakes, like showing California as an island or putting sea monsters in unexplored waters. Others were deliberate. Cartographers sometimes added fake towns or rivers, known as trap streets, to catch copycats. Maps didn't just guide travelers, they also spread myths and propaganda about who controlled the world. 19. Rome fell in one day. We're often told that Rome fell in 476 AD, as if one morning the empire was mighty and the next it collapsed. The truth is far slower. Rome declined over centuries due to economic troubles, political corruption, and invasions. Even after the Western Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, thrived for another 1,000 years. So Rome didn't fall like a toppled building, it eroded like a crumbling wall. 20. Witches were always women. The image of the witch as an old woman with a broom is powerful, but it's misleading. During witch hunts, many men were also accused and executed. In some places, entire families faced charges of witchcraft. The idea that only women were targeted simplifies a much broader and more tragic history of fear, superstition, and scapegoating. 21. Gladiators always fought to the death. Hollywood loves to show Roman gladiators battling until only one man is left standing in a bloody arena. But in reality, most gladiators didn't fight to the death. They were valuable investments, often trained for years in special schools. Owners didn't want to waste that kind of money on fighters dying every match. Instead, many fights ended when one fighter was clearly defeated or injured. Yes, there were brutal deaths, but far fewer than the movies suggest. The always to the death myth comes from exaggeration, entertainment, and Rome's reputation for bloodlust. 22. Isaac Newton discovered gravity by an apple falling on his head. We all know the story. Newton was sitting under a tree when an apple dropped on his head, and suddenly he understood gravity. Cute story, right? But it's a lie. Newton himself said he got the idea while watching an apple fall, but it never hit him on the head. That little twist was added later to make the tale more dramatic. In truth, Newton spent decades working on complex mathematical theories before publishing his groundbreaking law of universal gravitation. The apple story makes him sound like a lucky genius, but his real achievement was years of hard, detailed work. 23. Medieval people thought tomatoes were poisonous. When tomatoes first arrived in Europe from the Americas, they weren't immediately popular, but not because everyone thought they were deadly. The truth is more complicated. Wealthy Europeans often ate tomatoes off pewter plates, which contained lead. The tomato's acidity caused lead to leach into the food, poisoning the diners. People blamed the tomato instead of the plate, and so the rumor spread that tomatoes were dangerous. In reality, it wasn't until the 18th century that tomatoes became widely loved in European cuisine. The lie kept people from enjoying pasta sauce for nearly 200 years. 24. The Middle Ages were filthy and nobody bathed. We've been told that medieval people lived in filth, never bathed, and stank constantly. While hygiene wasn't modern by any means, this image is exaggerated. In fact, public bathhouses were common in many European towns during the early Middle Ages. People washed with cloths, changed linens regularly, and even used perfumes and herbs. It's true that during the later Middle Ages, religious leaders discouraged frequent bathing, but even then, people didn't completely abandon cleanliness. The "everyone was dirty all the time" story is mostly a Victorian-era lie, designed to make the past look worse than the present. 25. The moon landing was faked. One of the most persistent modern lies is that the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969 was staged in a Hollywood studio. Conspiracy theorists point to things like the flag waving or missing stars in photos. But every claim has been debunked. The flag appeared to move because it was designed with a wire to hold its shape, and there are no stars in the photos because of camera exposure settings. On top of that, thousands of people worked on the Apollo missions, and astronauts from other countries have since confirmed lunar landings were real. The hoax theory thrives because it's easier to distrust than to accept massive scientific achievements. But make no mistake, humans really walked on the moon. 26. The Great Fire of London ended the plague. In 1666, the Great Fire of London destroyed most of the city. For years, people said the fire had a silver lining. It ended the deadly bubonic plague by burning away rats and fleas that carried the disease. But this isn't true. The plague had already been declining before the fire. In fact, London's worst plague year was 1665, and by the time the fire broke out the next year, the epidemic was nearly gone. The fire destroyed countless homes and landmarks, but it didn't play the heroic role history sometimes gives it. The plague cure story was a comforting lie, making people feel the disaster had at least some hidden purpose. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this series. And I want to hear from you, which of these lies surprised you the most? Or did I miss a big one you think should have been on the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, history is written by the winners, but the truth always finds a way out.